Hi, I'm Ben Skydell. I teach here at Drisha in the Dr. Beth Samuels High School program and in the July Institute. This week's Parsha is Parashat Chayei Sarah. There is an interesting question in the halachic literature as to whether or not a father can force a son to marry a woman who he sees fit, even if the son himself does not desire to marry her. And even though generally our halachic tradition recognizes kibud av va'em, honoring parents, as a fundamental mitzvah in the Torah, nonetheless, the halacha states, and this is quoted in the Shulchan Aruch by Ramah in Yoredea Siman Reish Mem, that a father actually is not allowed to demand that their child marry, or their son marry, a specific woman. And the basis of this decision is actually a tshuva from a Moreinu Harav Yosef Kalon, the Tshuvot Ma'arik. And the Tshuvot Ma'arik even takes it a step further. And he says that if a father makes a son swear that he's going to marry a woman, and the son doesn't want to, then the swear is null and void, and he has no requirement whatsoever to marry this woman. Perhaps the basis for this is found in our Parsha. Because there's an interesting irony, an interesting problem that's pointed out by the great later commentary, Meshech Chachma of Meir Simcha Cohen of Dvinsk. He points out that when it comes time for Abraham, to marry off his son Yitzchak, his son Isaac, he doesn't force his son Isaac to swear that he's not going to marry a Canaanite woman. Rather, what does he do? He sends his servant, or his slave, and he says, Va'ashbiacha baronai Elohei Hashemayim ve'Elohei ha'aretz, asher lo tikach isha livni mibnot ha'knani, asher anochi yoshev b'kirbo. He makes his servant, or his slave, swear that he will not take a Canaanite woman for a son, but he does not, in fact, make his son Isaac swear. And the Shechachma points out that perhaps the reason is that when it comes to a slave or a servant, the master has the ability to force him or to compel him to do what he wants, but that's not necessarily the case for a son. And Meshech Chachma writes further. He says that later on in the Torah, you'll note that Yitzchak himself, Isaac himself, makes Yaakov, makes Jacob his son swear, or makes him lo tikach isha mibnot ha'knani. Don't take a Canaanite woman. But he actually, does not make him swear. And Meshech Chachma points out that there's a real radical difference between the two of them. When it came to Avraham and his slave, Avraham and his servant, he made him swear. Why? Because he wanted him to fulfill his will. And that's the relationship that a slave or servant and the master has. But when it came to Isaac and his son Jacob, he's telling him, you cannot marry a Canaanite woman. Why? Because I want you to have the blessings of my father Avram. I want you to be the progenitor of our family and our covenantal community. And if you marry someone from this region, you won't be able to do so. And there's a radical difference between them. When it comes to Abraham and his slave, the question is, how can I force my servant, my slave, to listen to me? When it comes to Isaac and Jacob, Isaac says to his son, if you don't do this, or if you do marry a Canaanite woman, you will not be able to become the progenitor of this spiritual vision. It's not a force, but rather it's this attempt to influence his decision. And I think these two episodes and the differences between them really show us a very important understanding that the Torah has between the difference between a relationship of a parent and a child and a master and a servant, or a master and a slave. And that is, when you have a master and a subject, the master can force, can compel, can order. That's that relationship. But parents and children do not share that relationship. A parent can seek to influence. A parent can try to convince. A parent can show the consequences of actions, but he can never compel to make life decisions. This is not only what our halachic tradition teaches us as far as who we should marry, but what the biblical tradition teaches us as well. And it's a very important difference in relationship. There is a radical difference between how a parent treats their child and a master treats their slave. Unfortunately, sometimes people confuse the two, but our holiest works teach us that it is vitally important that we learn to separate them and to distinguish these two relationships. Shabbat Shalom.